So the format tonight, we have three experts here. One is Liz Johnson, who is, of course, yay, hi Liz, um, experienced organizer and secretary, and the one who is just really doing all the work behind the scenes of all kinds of events and accepting your entries to many events. And she's going to go over a little bit about how to get those entries in really complete and making life easier for you and all of the people involved in putting on the events you're going to. And then we are going to hear from Katherine, who is a USEF licensed technical delegate. And she's going to be going over some of the national rules, going over that sort of side of things. And then after that, and you will have some couple of minutes to ask questions. So write down questions as you think of them if you need anything to be clarified. And then we're going to move on to Jane Hamlin, who's an international judge. She judges the FEI levels. She's a FEI eventing judge, and she's going to go over some things that she really thinks that would be really helpful to get your season started. Maybe if you're moving into the FEI levels for the first time, some of the differences, some of the things that you really want to think about. And then at the end, stay tuned, because I have a gift certificate from Stratford Saddlery for everybody here. I'm going to madly write down your names and shake them around in a hat when we're all done, and pick a door prize drawing. So let's get going with Liz.
Thank you, Melanie. So I'm going to keep this super brief, and I'm going to run through some slides here. And I'm also going to drop some of the links to the resources that I'm mentioning in our chat. And if you have questions, again, feel free to use the chat feature while we're doing this, or hang on to them to the end. So, all right. So we're going to get started with sort of what an entry form and how to enter your horse trials. So first, again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. And despite the current weather in New England, our show season is right around the corner, and it's time to get prepared. So I know you've all been doing a lot of prep work with your horses and your coaches, and you're riding right now. But in addition to all that prep work that you're doing in the barn, there are some easy organizational tips and know-how that will help you enter horse shows this season. And with on-time completed entries, you have a higher likelihood of getting into the events you wish, while avoiding late fees, wait lists, and last-minute stress in the show office, which we're all about avoiding. So let's jump into it and start with what the omnibus listing, also known as the official prize list, is. This is a document that's submitted by each show to the USEA and through the USEF's office, and it contains all of the information that's pertinent to that show. So the levels that are being offered, what officials are going to be there, the fees to enter that show, the location, the dates of that show, and even more about sort of the levels that are being offered, or anything else that you might need to know as a competitor getting ready to go to that horse show. This used to be a printed booklet that was mailed out with your membership. Times have changed, and now you can access the prize list through an online calendar at useventing.com. You can also access them through the US Event Companion app, which is available through your app store. And also the Area 1 website. If you haven't been to that website recently, it's another resource that has links to each recognized horse trials omnibus, along with some schooling and clinic opportunities. So definitely check that out as well. And even though we're talking about recognized horse trials, most schooling shows produce some sort of prize list, which simply indicates what's being offered, how to enter, etc. So that's going to, again, tell you all the information you need to know. So step 2, and you'll be hearing many times this evening, your responsibility as a competitor is to know the rules of the sport you're playing. And this applies to entries as well. you need to know what parts of the entry form are mandatory, who needs to sign your entry form, and along with what divisions you and your horse may be eligible to compete in. The mandatory people on your entry form are firstly the rider, the owner of the horse, the trainer, and potentially your parent or guardian if you or the rider's a minor. And you may also have a coach signing your entry form as well, but that is not technically a requirement. So the rider and the owner roles are pretty apparent and are certainly defined in the USEF rulebook, but I need to clarify the trainer because there's often a lot of confusion about who the trainer is on an entry form. So the trainer, as defined by the United States Equestrian Federation Rulebook, GR, which stands for General Rule 148, is any adult or adults who has the responsibility for the care, training, custody, or performance of a horse. Said person must sign the entry form of any licensed competition, whether said person be an owner, rider, agent, or coach, as well as the trainer. When a minor exhibitor has no trainer, a parent or guardian must sign and assume the responsibility of the trainer. The name of the trainer must be designated on the entry blank. It is so common, especially for me as a secretary, to see entry forms that are incomplete because the trainer information is simply left blank, or for the entry to be inaccurate because the competitor simply added the person that they're taking some lessons with, and that is not officially the role of the trainer. So to sort of simplify that, the trainer is the adult person who's responsible for the welfare of the horse. So the rule book, really quickly, is available at usequestrian.com and also at the rulebook app, which is really easy because it's searchable. So know your rules. Step 3, walking you through the entry form. You have lots of choices here on how to enter. So there are certainly paper copies. You can also enter through a variety of online resources. And the omnibus of the horse show may tell you what the organizer or secretary prefers. And it's usually best to go with what the secretary prefers. It's going to be easiest for them in their system. You're going to make them happy secretaries, make the whole horse show run a little bit smoother. So check that out. So some of the online sources to enter would be using evententries.com or Xentry, which is a product of the USEA. Blue Horse Entries is another option. So whatever the horse show partners with makes it easiest for them to accept your digital entry along with digital payment. However, if, for example, an event you are entering is not partnered with, I'll use Event Entries here, but you already have a profile with that particular source set up, you can still enter and use that entry website to fill out your entry form, but there's just an extra step. You'll have to print it and mail it with your signed signatures and your payment. So it just takes a little bit extra. The Xentry is a product of the USEA, and it can be accessed by going through your USEA dashboard. Payments here can be made electronically, and electronic signatures can be attached. You don't need to be a member of the USEA to access Xentry, and this would apply if, for example, you are competing at an unrecognized level such as intro. So step 4, complete entries. This means that your entire entry form is filled out, including the signature page, which is page 2, and the USCF waiver, which has more signatures now on page 3. And these signatures need to come from the mandatory people on your entry, the rider, owner, trainer, parent, or guardian. And the signatures need to match the information on the front page of your entry. If there's a mismatch, it means that the secretary has to contact you to figure out who actually is responsible or whose information should be correctly listed on the front of the entry form. You also cannot write same in the signature line. This is a legally binding document, and a signature needs to be affixed to all of that, including electronic signatures. So there are a couple of options for that. And if you have incomplete or missing signatures, it's one more step for the secretary, and you risk being assessed late or incomplete fees. So step 5 would be knowing your dates. So what I'm referring to here are your opening and your closing days. These are important to know, and yes, they are also found at the very top of your omnibus listing. If you are trying to enter a horse show that gets oversubscribed or fills, they must take entries based on a first come, first served basis. So getting your entry either time stamped, so from those digital entries, or postmark dates, which means putting it in the mail or at the mail post office on the opening day, is going to give you a much higher likelihood of being accepted into that horse show. Also, it's a huge courtesy to your organizers to note your intention of entering so they can plan appropriately for the number of rings and for other scheduling considerations. It's sort of been a trend, it's my little soapbox, in the past number of years for entries to wait until the very last days before closing day, and then we get a huge influx of entries, sometimes 100 or more entries that come in at the very end, and we, as an organizing committee, have perhaps already canceled a judge or dropped a ring because we just simply didn't think there was a need. So your organizers will be very appreciative of your early entering. You can always scratch your entry before the closing date for either a complete or almost complete refund. And the refund policies will be found in, you guessed it, the omnibus. So you can give yourself a little bit of a grace period if you're not quite sure if you're going to be able or ready to compete or what level you're going to be in. So don't delay, get your entries in, know what those opening days are, and make sure your changes, if you're making some, happen by closing date. Most secretaries or horse shows are able to accommodate a variety of changes after the closing date, but at that point, there usually are going to be additional fees associated with those changes. And last step, step 6, these are some sort of miscellaneous tips here that, depending upon the show that you're trying to enter, some of these may apply, some of them don't. So a big one is stabling considerations. Your secretary is not a mind reader. So if you are stabling with a group of people, or even just with one barn mate, make sure that all members of that group list the same name to be stabled with. If you all list each other's names, oftentimes the computer systems that we're using to process entries sort stabling by a single name alphabetically. And so if you have listed, or your group has listed 3 or 4 different names, or even a misspelling of a barn or a trainer name, the likelihood of your group getting put together is slim, especially if it's a big show. If you have 100, 200, 500 entries, it is very difficult to puzzle out the stabling components if the same stable with name isn't listed. And then once you show up to the horse show, it's much more difficult to try and move a stall that's already been bedded and set up. So do everyone a courtesy and try to get on the same page. Make sure your memberships are up to date for all entities on your entry. So again, that's the horse registration, but the memberships also for rider, owner, trainer. Everybody needs to be a USEA membership starting at beginner novice, but there are some different levels, especially for horses. There's a limited membership that applies to horses below training level. So there are different requirements based on the level you're competing. So know those. I'll post in the chat this link here, which brings up a really slick grid that outlines what membership levels are required for whom and at what level. So take a peek there. And then any other details that you and your horse may be eligible for, like particularly special awards, these are good things to note on your entry as well. The TIP program, which is the Thoroughbred Incentive Program, if you have a thoroughbred that you're competing, this is a free registration, and many of our horse trials are offering extra prizes and awards for that. But some horse shows also offer other breed or special awards. So again, in your omnibus, this kind of information would be listed, and it's good to note here on your entry. So that was a really quick rundown. But without any further ado, I'm going to, unless anyone has a question, I am going to introduce our next speaker, who is joining us from just down the road from me. So I'd like to take a minute to introduce Katherine Cooper, who started eventing in 1981. And she's been a TD, a technical delegate, for almost 10 years. She runs a small training barn in Epping, New Hampshire, and also works part-time as an attorney. She's worked with a number of top trainers and riders over the years and have experience riding and training in the UK, Portugal, Germany, Italy, and Holland. She's also served as an Area 1 chair on the USEA Board of Governors, the Legal Committee, Nominating Committee, and then a founder of the Equine Medical Research Fund. She's also served on the board, the USEA Foundation Board, and several USES committees. So in addition to being a very busy lady, she's also intimately familiar with the rules of our sport. So she is more than capable of sort of walking us through our national rules. So I will turn it over to Katherine.
Thanks, Liz. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, super. I'd like to begin by commending you all for actually attending a seminar that has to do with the rules. Like, that's the first step, and very impressive, and you should pat yourself on the back just for being here. But it is really important that we have rules. The reason for it is just so that we have a level playing field for all our competitors, and also because our rules for eventing really put the welfare of the horse at the forefront. So you want to know the rules, both to be a good participant and competitor, and also to be a good horseman. And the other thing is, when you think about how much time and money and effort and emotional energy and everything that we put into this sport, the last thing you want to do is have a wasted entry or a bad result or just a plain old embarrassing day, just because you didn't know a rule. So we don't have a ton of time this evening. So what I did is I put together just a little story to use to highlight a few rules. But before I start that, I want to just explain basically how our rule system is structured. A lot of times you'll hear people say, well, what do the USEA rules say? The USEA actually doesn't put together the rules. The rules are promulgated and enforced by the USEF, and there's a cooperation agreement between the USEF and the USEA for them to do that. So even though the USEA has input into the rules, it's actually the USEF that is the governing body that enforces the rules. And I really want to mention that because when you look up the rules, you want to go to the USEF website. And part of the reason for that is because each chapter for each discipline, the different sports, the different breeds, we each get our own chapter. But in addition to that, there are several segments called the general rules that apply to all the sports. So a lot of what Liz was talking about to do with entries actually is governed by the general rules. And a lot of those requirements for entries actually go across the board to all different sports: dressage, show jumping, Andalusians, Pasafinos. Like, we all have to deal with certain general rules that are the same. Part of the reason that, well, let me take a step back. I would really encourage you all to just download the rules to your phone. You can print them off. I would recommend that you do not print off the entire USEF rulebook, though. Just do the eventing section and possibly the general rules. But you want to have access to these. And, this is a great time of year. It's still pretty cold and nasty out. Go through a section of the rules every night before you go to bed. You don't have to memorize them. You're not going to memorize them. I have to tell you, even as a technical delegate, I review the rules before I go to every competition. I also make myself, it's kind of one of my Christmas week traditions, I go through the rules. But you'll find that the more times you scan them, you're going to pick up on different things. And the more experience you build as an eventer, the more competitions you go to, the more things you see that have to do with horses. You'll go back and through the rule book again, and all of a sudden something will jump out to you that you completely didn't pick up on the last time you went through them, because you've learned something in addition to, you've learned something more, and that's made you actually recognize why that rule is important and why it's significant. And I also would just mention, so even as someone who reviews the rules constantly, I never, if someone asks me a question or if something comes up at a show, with rare exceptions for really basic things like how many points for a first stop, I know 100% what that is. Most of the time, even if I think I know the answer, I go to the rule book. And this is part of my training as a lawyer too. You don't want to just give answers off the cuff. You want to go check your sources. So I always have my rule book. I force myself to just, go take a quick look, make sure you're right, and make sure the rule hasn't changed, and make sure your memory is actually accurate as to what the rule is. So don't feel like you have to memorize these, but do become familiar with them. So here's our little example story that I put together of Sally going eventing. And I'm going to do the share screen. Liz, maybe if you can you tell me if this is working?
Okay.
It's just a Word document. Can you see it?
Not yet, no.
Oh,
yes. Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Okay. So nothing fancy. I don't have the tech know-how that Liz does.
Can you make the font bigger, Catherine?
What's that?
Can you make the font bigger or zoom in?
Let's see. Is that better?
Yeah, perfect. There you go.
Okay, super. All right. So Sally has entered into a horse trials where she lives, and she gets to the show the day before it starts, and she's asked the stabling manager where she's allowed to exercise her horse. Now, this is a good move because under Eventing Rule 1083A, it states that a show has to give you a place to school your horse during daylight hours. But it doesn't mean that you're allowed to go all over the entire property, and they're allowed to restrict where you can go. So you want to make sure that you know where you're allowed to be and that you don't get disqualified for going someplace that you're not supposed to be. So it's 3 p.m. Note the time. So Sally figures she'll hop on first and then go to the secretary after while her horse cools out before she braids him, because the secretary's booth is way on the far end of the property. While I think that this is a very good time management strategy, it creates a problem because under Eventing Rule 1081, Sally is violating a rule that requires horses to wear a number whenever they are being ridden or worked. So you need to pick up your packet and get your bridle number before you start exercising your horse. So anyway, Sally hops on and she sorts out her draw reins that she's thrown on because Mr. Personality seems rather excited and she doesn't want to get run away with while she's schooling him. But even though it seems like Sally is possibly doing something safe, she's actually violating a rule because there are restrictions on the kinds of equipment that you can use to school your horse on showgrounds, and those restrictions begin at 3 p.m. the day before competition. So if she wanted to use the draw reins, she'd have to ride them at home in the draw reins or use the draw reins prior to 3 o'clock, even if she's on the grounds. So a couple of things at issue there. You got to be really aware of what equipment is allowed in different phases of the competition and when you can use it. So Sally goes over to the dressage warm-up area. It's kind of crowded. So she's like, well, I'll go to the show jump warm-up area instead. There's fewer horses over there. And she has been told that both those spaces are okay for schooling. Mr. Personality is a little stiff, so Sally decides to pop him over a few jumps to loosen up his back, since she's been told she can ride over there. This is another problem. You're not allowed to jump unless the competition has specifically told you jumping is allowed. There's a couple reasons for that. One of which is that a veterinarian has to be on grounds when any jumping goes on. And another little clue here is that there's another rule, which is under EV 1084, that specifically says that there must be a ring steward anytime jumping is going on. So if you're ever wondering, am I allowed to start jumping yet? Like say you're one of the first horses to go on cross country or stadium, make sure that there's a ring steward there or a person running the gate, and that you're not starting to jump before you're allowed, because that will result in disqualification. And that's a rule that's very carefully monitored because it's a major safety issue. So even though Sally's popped Mr. Personality over a few jumps in violation of the rules, he's still behaving poorly. And Sally's trainer has just arrived. So Sally's trainer hops on to school him a bit for her. Now, that might seem like this is okay because it's the day before the show. But again, that 3 p.m. rule, no one other than the competitor is allowed to train or school a horse during the competition. There is an exception. And Sally's mom decides to hop on Mr. Personality to take him back to the stables while Sally goes to get her packet. Now, that might actually seem like a worse thing than having your trainer ride the horse, but it's actually okay, because grooms or helpers are allowed to hop on a horse and walk it or even trot a little bit to move them from one place to the other. It's really just for transportation of the horse. Okay, so Sally and her mom get back to the barn and they decide that Mr. Personality is still kind of wound up from being away from home. So they decide to give him some medication. They give him some Ace crumbles and some Butte and his grain dinner to hopefully help him relax. And they figure, well, it's the night before, so it won't affect him in the morning. So it shouldn't be a problem. This is actually a problem. The Ace will stay in the horse's system for days, and drug testing occurs at events of all levels. And we actually get drug testers in Area 1 on a regular basis. So you want to make sure that you follow the drugs and medications rules. It is possible to use Butte legally in national competitions, but you do have to be careful that you know the correct levels and that you're doing it in the right time. So if you're not aware of this, you might want to jot down this phone number. It's the USEF Drugs and Medications line, and the number is 1-800-633-2472. And I'll repeat that again in a minute. It's the USEF Drugs and Medications line, and I strongly encourage you, if you are ever worried about whether a drug is legal, the time frames that you need to have the drug be out of the horse's system. Some of them can be weeks. So you do need to be really careful with this. I will tell you though, the people that staff the drugs and medications line are very knowledgeable, and they're also super nice. They're not even going to ask who you are. They're not going to ask why you're asking this question. They will just give you the information. You do it anonymously. They're very helpful. I've called this line numerous times for all kinds of things. One time I even called about raspberry leaves because I wanted to try those on a mare. And I was like, it's probably fine, but I just didn't know. And I couldn't find raspberry leaves in the rules. And I don't know what raspberry leaves are made out of. So I called, and they actually looked it up for me, and we figured out that I could use that at that time with that mare. But just make sure that you are very careful with any kinds of medications that you're giving. Sally, though, not being super careful, also decides to give Mr. Personality an injection of Adequine to lube up his joints because he's a little older and she feels like he was stiff from trailering. Now, Adequine is legal to give your horse, but there's another rule, and this is under the general rules, the GR section. 404 is implicated, and also GR 414, because you're not allowed to give a horse an injection within 12 hours of competition. There's also a lot of restrictions on what kinds of medications and therapeutic substances horses are allowed to have through injection. And they also should be given by a veterinarian, not by your mom. So, unless your mom's a vet. But make sure that you, once again, review what can be given and how. The other reason that this is important is because even though Sally's trainer signed her entry, as Liz mentioned before, Sally decided not to discuss this medication with her because she felt like she's always kind of uptight and conservative about such things, and she just wanted her horse to feel his best, and she knew what would work. this is a really big problem because if there was drug testing and the horse tested positive for ACE, Sally's trainer has put her name on that entry form, and she can potentially be suspended or have other kinds of ramifications for that medication because she has taken on responsibility for that. So just because of time, I'm not going to go through any other additional specific rules, but I hope this gives you an example of the fact that, you know, we didn't even get to dressage yet, and we've already had, you know, a dozen to 24 rules implicated in Sally's arrival and prep to even before she gets to dressage. So, and also it's important to, I liked this example because it does show you how many of the rules are for the horses. And you want to make sure that you're doing what's right for your horse. And you also want to make sure that the rules you don't break a rule and accidentally violate someone else's, you know, ability to compete fairly and well, or to lose their ability to work, if it's your trainer. So, I think if anybody has any questions, if you want to toss them in the chat. Liz, you can see the chat, right?
Yep. So if anyone has any quick questions, I encourage you to ask now, or you could pop them in the chat, or at the very end when Melanie is dealing with our door prize, I think we could also take some chats then if you had something specific to ask. So if anyone wants to pipe up now.
Okay, I will just add one more thing, just in terms of getting a hold of the rules. When you renew your membership each year, it's possible to get a copy of the eventing rules from the USEA, and it costs $10 to get a paper copy sent to you, which is very convenient. The other thing that you can do, the way the USEA, or excuse me, the USEF has the rules set up, it's really easy to download them and just keep them on your phone. So, you know, you can carry them with you, or if you're not driving the trailer on the way to the show, you can do a little quiz with your friends or study up. So anyway, I hope to see you guys out there. And also just want to mention, if you do have a question about a rule at a show, don't hesitate to talk to the TD. The organizer and the staff can help you find the TD, and the TDs are always much, much happier to answer a question than to have to disqualify or eliminate someone, because that's not what we want to do out there. We want everybody to be having a good, safe, fun competition and to complete it. So never hesitate to ask if you're wondering if you're allowed to do something. So thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Catherine. Okay, next expert up is Jane Hamlin. We're not going to see her face, but you will hear her voice. So Jane, if you want to unmute yourself here as I introduce you. Jane is an FEI eventing judge, and hopefully, Jane, you can correct me if I get any information about you wrong. But she is kind of the top level eventing judge. She, in fact, is going to be judging at the Tokyo Olympics this summer. She has judged at World Equestrian Games. She's judged all over all kinds of continents in Europe. Badminton she's judged at. She's judged in Australia, and she judges all around the US as well. And I think she is fresh off the plane from being one of the 4-star judges at Red Hills this weekend. So Jane is going to talk to us a bit about the FEI rules and her thoughts there. And you'll get a chance when she's done to ask a few questions. So get your thoughts together, and here we are. Jane, are you there? Let me just make sure if she isn't. I know that she's on. Can we do a direct chat to her, Liz?
Yes, but if she's on a phone, she won't see it.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, here. I know I saw her phone number on here, so hang on. Jane, are you unmuted? Because if you aren't, we can't hear you. Jane, are you on? We may be having connection issues.
Yeah, her icon is unmuted, so she should be able to speak if.
Yeah, I did send her that ask the participant to unmute message. I don't know if that goes through on a phone, but.
I just texted her too, so.
While we're waiting, can I field any questions for Katherine or rules related or specifics?
I mean, I will tell you kind of a funny story from, I was TDing at Barnstaple in January. Oh, is that Jane?
She did say she can hear and she's unmuted.
Oh, no, she's muted again. I can see it.
Okay, try and unmute again, Jane, because we can see that you're muted on the.
Now she's not.
I'm unmuted.
Okay.
I can hear you. So I'll tell you
Oh,
guys
you
that
can hear
story
me?
another time.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yay!
Okay, woohoo! Okay, I've been doing that, but it didn't work. So that is me jinxing my technical skills here. So I'll be quick, guys, because I'm sure you're all have homework and all that stuff. But I'm sort of touching base on the FEI rules. And the first thing to do is to make sure that you know whether your FEI competition is short or long. The short one is basically an international horse trials. The long one is kind of the championship of all of that. So there are different qualifications for both. You really should do short before you do a long, but you do need to know when you look at the FEI schedule, you can't just enter anything. It's very regulated. And then you have to go to and get an FEI number both for the horse and for the rider. And I believe you can get that through the USEF. But you have to register and get a number. And then once you have that, then you have to get a national passport, which you can either get a national one or a regular FEI passport. And the difference would be if you're planning to compete outside of the US, you would need the regular FEI passport, which is slightly more expensive and definitely takes time to get. So don't think you're going to just get it within a couple of weeks. Your vet has to fill an identification page out. Sometimes the vets haven't done that very often. Then it has to get sent back again to get corrected. And then it has to get sent back by your federation, which is the USEF, to get stamped. So it seems daunting. It is totally doable, but it does take time. So that's one of those things you just have to schedule in. Also, your horse has to be microchipped. And if you get a horse from Europe, they're all microchipped now pretty much, but your local horse here, but in this country often isn't. So you do need a microchip. So that your vet can do that. That's not horrible or a big surgery or anything, but it does have to get done. The next thing, and this really, mostly because we're so close to Canada, and hopefully we'll have Fauché next year, and then we have Bromont. If you're competing out of the U.S., you have to get permission from the USEF to compete out of the U.S. So, and they will look at your qualifications very carefully. So that's something you have to kind of plan in And it is a little bit of a pain to apply, but once it's in, it's done. So you have to fill out a form and this and that. The other thing you have to do is make sure you have, we call it MERs, and the MERs, that's a big phrase, and it's going to come into play on the national level, but it's the minimum eligibility requirements. And you may be working on them as you're getting ready to go to this event. You may not have totally completed them, but they do have to be complete by the time you enter. So you need to look that up. It's a bit complicated, but you do have to make sure that you are in compliance with all of that. So just entering the event, I mean, it seems incredibly daunting, but it is doable, and there's tons of us that can help you do it. And the USDF is very helpful if you call them. So don't be shy about it. Don't think that it's impossible to do, but you just have to plan ahead. It can't be something done over, you know, just in a short notice. So then when you've got your event coming up, Catherine was great at talking about drugs, horse drugs, and there is that USDF number, which will also help you with the FEI drug situation too. But basically, the rule of thumb with the FEI is no drugs. You can't use bute, you can't do, this is a big difference from the national rules. When in doubt, no drugs, and you have to be super careful with your supplements, because a lot of supplements, herbal supplements and stuff have illegal substance in it, according to the FEI. And even some things like what liniments you put on and treats you give your horse, you have to be so careful. So when in doubt, call that drug number. When in doubt, don't use anything funky. Just keep it simple. There have been, and like in your barn, if you have an older horse in the barn that's getting abused or something else, and you by mistake put your horse in that stall and the horse licks that other horse's grain dish, you know, then you're already potentially, you know, exposing it to enough drugs that it's going to be seen in the drug panel. And FEI events, they're usually always drug testers. So don't fool around with that one. Just be super careful. So when you get to the event, it's a bit different with a short format versus a long format, but when you get there met by a vet, and you'll have an arrival exam, which is basically the vet will do your temps, you know, temperature, they'll have the horse jog up, make sure it's not sick, make sure it's sound enough to be at the event. That vet cannot eliminate you if your horse isn't quite right, but they will report back to the official vet. But that's also your time to say, hey, my horse has this huge splint, this is normal, or my horse has a cut here, normal. You might even ask that vet, is it okay if I put this stuff on it? You know, don't be afraid to talk to the officials. I mean, Catherine will say the same thing. We all want you to get through the event. We don't want to eliminate anybody on some dumb formality that the person just didn't know. And then if it's a long format CCI, then you will have, this is just an arrival exam, but then you'll also have horse inspections. One is before dressage and one is before show jumping. And those are with the ground jury, the panel of ground jury, and the official vet. So those are the time you braid and your horse looks fabulous and you look fabulous and you go trot your horse up, which you will have practiced a million times. But if for some reason your horse doesn't look acceptable to them at that moment, they can send you to what's called a holding area. And you can go to that holding area with your trainer, and it's probably not a bad idea. And there'll be the associate vet, and he can do some passive examining of the horse. And that is the time, sometimes they'll look at you and say, you know what, I think this horse is quite lame, and you have to make that decision whether you want to be re-inspected or whether you just want to withdraw at that time. So those are all things to think about as you get ready to do this big event. Equipment, super different. There's some super different things in an FEI event. you do have a steward, and a steward is your best friend. Steward is a little different than a TD. The stewards monitor all the warm-ups. They will check your equipment. They'll be your bit checker, believe it or not. So the stewards are, but they're also really helpful. I can't tell you how many times I've gone with a bit, either with mine or with a student, and said, "What is this okay?" Even if I'm pretty sure it's okay, but I have a little question. Or all the new funky bridles. You know, if you have a question with the bridles, take your bridle in, show it to them. You know, don't be afraid to use your steward. They're really, really helpful. Couple of examples: you can't use a Dr. Bristol bit in FEI competition for dressage. People don't know that, but you can't use that. You can't use a hackamore for cross country. You can use a hackamore in combination with the bit, but the reins have to be attached to a bit. They can't be attached to a hackamore, and that's a safety issue, because the worry always is that the hackamore or the rein will break and you don't have anything attached to the bit. So there are definitely rules. This is all on the website, the FEI website. It's like Catherine was saying, you can get your rules on the website. There's something called, there's a little tack thing in there that you really can look at and sort of see pictures of. Couple other changes. Now it's an FEI rule that you do not shave your horse's whiskers. Believe it or not, they're considered sensory. Horse feels things. Don't shave the whiskers. And they've been doing that for years in Europe. They don't shave the whiskers, but we all do. And now that is not legal anymore for FEI competition. You can't use your whip in dressage. In our national competitions, except championships, you can use a whip. But for FEI competitions, you can't. You'll get 2 points off your dressage test. Length of spurs. They can be 4 centimeters, which who knows what that really means in inches. And that's not measured just the length of the spur, but that's measured from your boot to the end of the spur. So and the bat length, and you know, all sorts of odd little things that you can find in the rule book. You can also ask. The other big equipment thing is that your horse's boots for show jumping can't weigh, all the boots combined with the bell boots cannot weigh more than 500 grams. And usually there'll be a scale. The FEI stewards will bring a scale with them, and you can weigh them ahead of time. Don't get eliminated for that, because they will often do everybody's boots, or some they'll just randomly pick people and they'll weigh your boots when you finish show jumping. So it's a little scary. I mean, there's 101 ways to get eliminated, and we don't want to do any of those when we're working at these events. So ask questions. Other little things you should know. You should know the rules for what horse abuse is, and what dangerous riding is. And they're very similar to our national rules, but there's certain penalties, and you should kind of know what those are. It's easy read. The other thing, corners. If you're in cross country, when you go to jump a corner, there's been huge discussion, and the rules changed a bunch. And nationally, we basically haven't got a specific rule for corners. You either jump it or you don't, which I think is probably the best solution. But for FEI, there's jumping it clean, which is no penalties. And that's basically the head, the neck, and both shoulders jump through the jump, across the jump, and then the hind end has to jump the height of the jump. So in other words, the shoulders can't kind of squeak through the flags, and then the hind end just runs sideways beside the jump. Then you can get 15 penalties, and that basically means that the head and shoulders have passed through, but they've dislodged the fence and the flag, and one shoulder has probably failed to pass. Let me say this over again. The head and neck pass through, but one of the shoulders fails to pass through the flags. still the hind end has to jump the height of the fence. And then there's the 20, which is a run out, where the horse just really avoids jumping the jump. So it's really it's still very controversial. And we have cameras, usually official cameras on these. So even down at 1 and 2 star, there should be an official camera on a corner or a skinny so that we can review if we have questions. And the official camera is just somebody videoing it on their phone. It's not as fancy as it sounds, but still that person is in the same spot all day videoing. So we can watch that video and say, "Ooh, well, that person's shoulders didn't really get through," or that person just knocked the flag over with their foot, and that is nothing. So, and the last thing I had is make sure you salute and show jumping. Totally different than national rules right now. You can just go in and pretty much wait for the bell. You're certainly not going to get penalties for not saluting, but it is accepted now. And if the judge if you're waiting for the bell, it's probably because you haven't saluted yet. So, but just as Catherine said, make sure you read the FEI rule book. It is online. It is easy to download on your phone. I never answer a question without looking up the answer on the rules, because in the FEI they change very often. So you really want to know. You want to know what the current rules are. Don't look at last year's rule book. Look at this year's rule book, and use your steward. Any other questions? Melanie, are you there? Hello?
Yep, I'm here. Yep.
Okay, good. I've disconnected somehow.
No, you're still on. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? You can type it into the chat, and
Or you're welcome to unmute yourself at this point to jump on as well.
yeah. Jane, I know that one of the questions that we had, and I don't know if you know it off the top of your head, but I kind of get mixed up. It is, there are certain levels that you can use a double bridle at the FEI levels, but you can't use them at all FEI levels, correct?
Right, you can only use 4 and 5 star now.
4 and 5, okay.
You can't use it at 3 star anymore.
Okay.
That's a relatively new rule. So, but you can use it at 4 and 5 star, which probably none of you are about ready to do right away. But so you can put your double bridles back in the tack room for now.
Don't use them. What's the most heartbreaking elimination you've had to do because somebody has not known a rule?
Well, a lot of passport irregularities that sometimes we have to send people home, which is, there's a vaccine rule with your passport that you have to have an initial series of flu vaccine, and people just haven't understood it and not gotten the proper series. That's just awful to send somebody home for that. And we do get that, and they don't even get to start. Lame horses, that's heartbreaking. You just don't want to send anybody home. We had just at Red Hills, it wasn't in my division, but it was in the 3-star. The 3-star B test and the 2-star B test are modified this year, so they're new. Somebody just didn't know the 3-star test, and they got too many errors, and they had to go get sent home just in dressage. So, you work so hard to get qualified, and then you do something stupid, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, so know your test. Any other questions anybody has?
I don't really believe anybody's out there listening anyway at this point. They've probably all fallen asleep.
No, we have 37 people on still.
That's incredible. Well done, you guys. That's
Yay.
so exciting.
They're all waiting for it to get drawn for a prize.
I know, that's what it is. I don't blame you guys. I wish I was young enough to get drawn for the prize.
So if there aren't any more questions, then we are so on time. It is 8:57. That's pretty.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
If we can get so Stratford Saddlery has donated a couple of gift certificates, 2 gift certificates. And I have this, okay, just so you can see, I have this pile of names that I've taken off. So basically the names I'm going to draw are the names of whatever thing you're connected with, because that's all I can tell for who is here. So I'm going to draw 2, and here's one, Betsy Levitt. So if that's the name of your device, then what I'm going to have you do is email me so that I can then email you back the gift certificate. But the first name that I drew was Betsy Levitt. And then the second name is Fiona Hazel.
Yay, Fiona.
So if those 2 people can email me, and I know that my email address is out there everywhere, so you won't have any trouble finding it, and I will get the Stratford Saddlery gift certificate to you, and thank you to them for supplying us with that. And if you live nearby, you can visit their store, but if you don't live nearby, all their stuff is available online, so it's really easy to just get onto StratfordSaddlery.com and you can use your gift certificate online, get what you need. So
I will mention also, Melanie, that if you are driving to GMHA, it's super easy to park out back with your trailer. So it doesn't seem like a place you'd be able to do that, but you can, and it's a super tax shop. So
awesome.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. This has been recorded, and so we are going to be able to post it on the Area 1 website, I think is probably the best place to do that. So if you know of somebody or you want to go back and see something again, then we can accommodate that. So you can look for it there. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you all.
Bye.